Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we are back in War Thunder and we are doing the second part of the ground vehicles which came out for update 1.59. If you're looking for my views on the Russian tanks which came out, or the Great British ones, you should check part 1, where part 2 we're going to be looking at Germany and USA. So let's get straight into it. Let's talk about Germany. First of all, we have the Raketen Jagdpanzer II ATGM tank. Now, this little thing is sat at 7.7. Seems to be quite a nice little nimble thing, but in part 1 I talked a lot about the IT-1 and the idea of an ATGM tank. So, basically, if you want my thoughts on what I think about the Raketen Jagdpanzer, or however you want to say it, it's going to be the same for all ATGMs. They all basically work in the same way. They all have the same issues, and they all have the same problems, they all have the same strengths, and they all have the same weaknesses. The only difference is targeting and anything like that, which is minute compared to the issues that I brought up in the last episode. So if you want my views on that, go and check that. The next one we're looking at is the Stur Emil SPG, and basically the only reason I can see the fact that this has been put in is because they needed something at rank 4 before the Raketen Jagdpanzer, which they decided to put in the open-top tank destroyer tree for some weird reason. I suppose they didn't have anywhere else to put it. Maybe put it after AA or something. I think that could have worked. But anyway, the Stur Emil, it is a tank destroyer that a lot of people have been asking for a long time in the game. No idea why. The same thing happens every single time with these tank destroyers, these open-top tank destroyers which have limited traverse. When the Marders, when I believe, the Marder 3, the Marder 3H, the Dickermax, the Nasson, all of these open-top tank destroyers, they all have the same issue. They have very low reload speeds compared to their tanks counterparts, which makes absolutely no sense. For me personally, I would think they would have better reload speeds. They do a lot of damage at their BR, which is what they should do, but they have absolutely no armor. The only real difference when looking at that is the Dickermax, where when it came out, its armor was definitely overperforming to what it should be, but now it seems to not be as much of a problem. So the Stur Emil basically has this trend as well. It has a massive gun, 128 long-barreled gun, which basically doesn't have a lot of armor. It's a glass cannon, which doesn't really move much. It definitely struggles to traverse, but if you get the gun on the target, whatever the target is, it's not going to be there anymore. It does struggle with armor penetration, so it can be very frustrating when you're using one of these big guns, and it's kind of like the KV-2, where you're very used to looking at tanks and watching them explode in the distance because you've shot at them. But if you ricochet, or if for some reason the shot doesn't go through, it can be amazingly annoying. Luckily for the Stur Emil, its BR isn't high enough to run into tanks which have too much crazy armor. At 6.0, you're looking at the Panthers. You may probably run into Tiger 2s, but in realistic, when we're looking at around 6.0, you're looking at the T-25, the Bulldog. You may run into the Super Pershing, which, even the Super Pershing doesn't have enough armor to stop this thing coming through. If you're looking at the Russian tanks, you're looking at the late T-34s. You may be lucky enough to run into a T-34-85. If you do, you will blow it up in one hit, and that's about it. If you run into the T-44, the IS-2, the PT-76 even, can you imagine if you run into that? The ASU-85, if you get your shot off and its accuracy, you will kill it. It's as simple as that. For some reason, and I don't know why, but these open-top tank destroyers seem to have a real issue with reload rates. When we compare the Nasson, it has an 88mm PaK 43 gun. It is the exact... it's not the exact gun. Yes, it is, sorry. I was looking at the Tiger E. It has the exact gun as the Tiger 2P and the Tiger 2H. It's a very powerful gun, and the Nashorn sits at 5.3, so it's very, very low. The thing I don't understand is why the reload rate is the same. I would think that it would be easier to reload a Nashorn than a Tiger II, just because you are in such an enclosed space in a Tiger II and everything like that. And I was just wondering if that was actually the case. And from what I've read about these open-top tank destroyers, especially when we look at American ones and German ones, it seems that it was easier to reload them. When we look at the Russian ones, they were very, very cramped, but then again their tanks were very, very cramped, so it was sometimes hard to reload. But with the Nashorn, and well, basically only the Nashorn, because if we look at the Dickermax and the Sturm Mill, they weren't exactly used that much. The Marder, I suppose we could talk about as well, but basically all of these tanks, tank destroyers, sorry, they were easier to reload, or at least the general consensus was, because they had more space. They were able to do it, basically free up their arms a little bit. It's a lot easier to reload a Nashorn than a Tiger II because of just the amount of space you have. Also, you don't have tons of people all over the place basically shouting commands and everything, and obviously an experienced tank crew can get through that, but you need to be an experienced tank crew. The Sturm Mill has a 128k 40 gun. It is the same size as the gun on the Jagdtiger. The gun on the Jagdtiger is better, and also the gun on the Jagdtiger is supported by the armor on the front and the sides of... sorry, only on the front of the Jagdtiger, I'm thinking of something else. So, the Jagdtiger is a lot better than it. It's also a full 1 OBR better, higher than it. So what we've got to look at when we look at the Sturm Mill, when we look at these massive tank destroyers, are they going to be useful? Now, I would contest that the only two tank destroyers for Germany, which are maybe not better, but at least equal to their counterparts, are the Dickermax and the Marder 3H, the first Marder. The reason the first Marder, at 2.7, is equal to its counterparts, the Panzer III Aus J1 and the Panzer IV F2, which are both higher BRs than it. The armor doesn't matter on those tanks, because you are coming up against T-34s mainly, and some of the early Shermans, which can put bullets in you. Your armor is not good enough, and the Marder basically... So, what I'm trying to get at is, it doesn't matter at this level, at this BR, if you're in a tank or if you're in a tank destroyer, if somebody shoots you, they're going to pen you. Like, that's basically how it's going to work. The issue the Marder has is its turret traverse. It's not very good, but where it makes up, because of that, where it makes up the difference is in its ammo. With the standard ammo, the APC-BC, it has HE filler, it has wonderful penetration, and it does a lot of damage. If you hit something with it, it will probably die, and if it doesn't, it's going to be severely crippled. The reason why the Panzer IV F2 was so good when the game first came out was because it had the the PZGR-39, which is very similar to the ammo on the Marder. Now, because the game has progressed a little bit, we're getting more tanks with different types of ammo, and all basically having their own characteristics and everything like that, depending on size, depending on mass, and things like that. But that doesn't mean that this Marder, with its basically big shell, cannot put a big dent in something. You're also comparing two vehicles where the difference in BR is a whole 0.7. But the Marder is quick. It can turn actually pretty well for a tank destroyer, which generally doesn't happen with the Germans. If we look at all of their closed tank destroyers, they don't traverse very well. But with the Marder 3, and in extension the Marder 3H, they turn alright, they turn pretty well, they are maneuverable. So, yeah, they're useful. The Dickermax is okay, because of its elevation. That's basically it. You can hide it in places on the map where you can't hide any other tank because you can get the gun down so low, turning it into a vacuum cleaner. The Sturm Mill is, even though it has really good gun elevation, the biggest issue that the Dickermax has is that it is still quite large, so it's easy to see. The Sturm Mill takes that to a new level. It is absolutely massive. If you don't see this thing on the map, then get your eyes tested. It's as simple as that. It sticks out like a sore thumb, and so does its arse. So if it is hid behind something, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to hide, especially with the massive gun on it. Its armor is as good as the Dicamax, but the issue is it's a whole 1.7 BR higher. Does its gun make up for that and its lack of traverse of the gun? No, it doesn't at all. So what I'm basically saying is, why would I take this over a Tiger E? They're at the same BR. The Tiger E has a full turret, it can rotate very well, it has armor which actually does something, and it has speed and it has traverse. The only reason to use a Stirrer Mill is if you're trying to get the racketing Jagdpanzer and you decide that you want that little bit of efficiency progress, but I would wager that the efficiency progress is negated by the fact that you're going to be doing so much better in the Tiger E. The Tiger E is a wonderful tank in this game, so is the Tiger H1. They are the first German tanks which properly stand up to what they are fighting. I mean, you can make comparisons to and say the Panzer IV F2 and the Panzer IV G stand up to what they're fighting because of their gun, but their armor does not. The Tigers do. So why would I take something which, yes, it has a bigger gun, but it has no armor, and the gun on the Tigers is easily good enough to pen anything anyway. It's the issue that tank destroyers have. There is an inherent bias in this game when it comes to turreted vehicles. And as there was in World War II, they were just better. That's why they were more mass-produced than a lot of tank destroyers. And generally people had to rely on things which were much easier to move. Basically, like static defenses or things that could be dragged by a truck, not these massive vehicles. There is only a few examples of tank destroyers being very, very useful, the Hellcat being one of them. And one of the main reasons with it is because it basically went against the grade of what a tank destroyer was. A tank destroyer was something, obviously, to destroy tanks. It makes sense. It needed a gun to destroy the tank, but that was really about it. So that's why a lot of these German vehicles do not have very powerful engines, do not have a lot of armor, because the idea is you shoot, and that's it. You've already won the battle. You get that first shot off, you pen the tank, and you're done. And also, you would be very defensive in these tank destroyers. Same with a lot of the German tanks, especially when we look after about 1942. You would be defensive. So a lot of these German tanks and tank destroyers were designed with the fact that they would have to be defensive entities. All of the Jagdpanzers are defensive tanks. They are not offensive tanks. You cannot push forward with them like you would with a turreted tank. You cannot do that with the Dicamax, you cannot do that with the Nashorn, you cannot do that with a Stirrer Mill, but you can do it with a Tiger, a Tiger II, and a Panther. So they're always going to be better in this game. No matter what BR you put the Stirrer Mill at, it's always going to be worse than a turreted tank. If you put it at 1.0, let's say you take it to the extreme, you put it at reserve. The reserves can still pen you, and you're going to get one shot off to their 7 or 8. You put it at tier 2, let's say you put it at tier 2. At tier 2, let's see what we have. You have the Panzer IV F2s, the Panzer IV F1. Let's say we put it at that Marder BR. Once again, you only get one shot to about their 3 or 4. Or maybe 2 or 3. But they can still pen you. They can still hurt you. They are faster than you. They traverse better than you. They have a turret, so they can turn that gun better than you. And they reload a hell of a lot faster than you. The Panzer III Aus J1 can get nearly 3 shots to your 1 in the Stirrer Mill. Actually, no. What am I talking about? Wait. What did I screw up here? Oh, yeah, I was looking at the Nashorn. The Stirrer Mill reloads at 23.6 seconds, right? The Panzer III Aus J reloads at 4.8. So let's say 5 seconds, right? To be generous to the Stirrer Mill. So, and we'll put the Stirrer Mill at 24 seconds to be not as nice. So, the Panzer III, with 5 seconds, it can nearly get off 5 shots to your 1 in the Stirrer Mill. That is the problem that the Stirrer Mill has. It doesn't matter how much damage you can do. If you miss that first shot, or if the enemy has 2 people, you are dying. Oops, because once your cover is blown, you're screwed. And that is an issue that all of these tank destroyers have, not just the Stirrer Mill. It was one of those weird things that people always called for. And I knew from the start it would be useless in the game, just like every other tank destroyer is, because they are inherently worse than their medium and heavy tank counterparts. So we'll move on, we'll look at the Panzer III Aus B. The Panzer III Aus B is actually quite a nice reserve tank. I would actually state it is one of the best reserve tanks. It has a lovely little 37mm on it, which is very similar to the Panzer IIIe. The only real difference I can tell is the fact that it has less armor. And to be honest, at reserve and at many levels of the game, most tanks can just pen each other anyway. Where its inherent advantage comes in is its gun. It fires APHE shells. You can fire APCR, but there is literally no point. Always stick with the APHE because it pens up to 65mm, and even at 2000, it pens 23mm. Let's see what reserve tanks have for armor. T60, 35, that's actually not bad. T26, 15, BT5, 40 on the front, so you can still pen all of them up to about 1,000 meters. Looking at the German tanks, 35, Panzer II. Flak Panzer, obviously, is a bit dodgy because it's open-topped. Panzer 35T, 25. Panzer 3B, 14. So yeah, it doesn't have a lot of armor, but it doesn't really matter. The M2A4, 25. The LVT, 12. the M2A2, 15. So as you can see, this gun is easily good enough to pen anything at most of its ranges. You're not really going to be firing at 2,000 meters in this thing, but up to 1,000 you can basically reliably pen anything that's going to be really coming at you. So its gun is really good, and because everyone's armor at this point in the tech tree really doesn't matter at all, you know, having a small amount of it doesn't, you know, it doesn't really matter. Everyone else has a small amount of it. The issue that it has is in realistic and simulator is the fact that its turret is incredibly slow. And this is a problem that a lot of these German tanks have at the lower levels. A lot of the other tanks, when we're looking at British and American, not so much Russian, but definitely British and American, when we're looking at the Tetrarch, when we're looking at the M2A4, stuff like that, they are going to be able to run circles around you, and their turret turns faster than you, so you have to be in a defensive posture to fight these people. And you can be easily, it's not hard to do. So that's the only advice I would give for this. When we're comparing it to other German tanks at this reserve BR, I would state that it's still worse than the Panzer IIc, just because the Panzer IIc has the ammo, the HVAP. It has HVAP for it, which, if you want, pens up to 64. What I would go for, though, is the PZGR, the second one, because it has APIT. You shoot through something, you destroy it in seconds. And because its armor penetration is good enough to take anything out up to 45mm, which is over everything that I just stated when we're looking at these things, it's better to have a rapid-firing gun. And with a slightly faster turret, the speed is negligible. You're always going to be outpaced by American and British tanks, maybe, and some of the Russian tanks when we look at the BTs. So, is it better than the Panzer IIc? No. Is it a solid reserve tank? Yes. We'll compare it to the LVT, which is better. The LVT, I would say it's better than the LVT just because it's smaller and its gun is much more effective. So we'll move on to the next one. So I'm going to do these both at the same time. We have a KV2 754 and a T34 747. So these are basically two premium tanks in the German tech tree. They're both Russians. They both have Russian equivalents. The T-34-747 is very similar to the 4.0 T-34, the T-34 ESTZ. It has the same gun, it has the same hull. It has a different turret though. Its turret is much more similar to something like a T-34 in 1942. So to me, it might just be, well, I don't know really. It seems a bit odd. Why would it be at 4.0? But it's basically a mashup of two of the T-34s that we see, and it's sat at 4.0. The KV-2 is once again, it's a KV-2 which has very minor differences. It's got the same engine, it's got the same gun, it's got the same ammo, it's got everything like that. It's just got a few physical differences which make it a bit more vulnerable, including that big bloody entrance on the top of it, which, if you can hit just right and shoot down, destroys the KV-2. But at the end of the day, it's a KV-2 at 4.3, which is exactly the same as the KV-2 1939, is it? Let's see. Yeah, it's the KV-2 mod 1939 in the Russian tree. So, you know, you're getting a KV-2 for the Germans. And I suppose instead of trying to balance T-34s, well, mainly T-34s, but also KV-2s to a much less extent, why not just give them to everyone? Like, I'm sure we'll see British T-34s, we'll see American T-34s and everything like that. Just because it's a lot easier to do than actually look at the problem, which is the T-34 and its armor. Its armor is way too bouncy, and it has many issues with it, mainly down to the fact that the grades of material that are used, which were used in the war, are not representative in game. Everything basically has the same type of metal. You would have to actually reduce the amounts of armor a T-34 has to compensate for that fact, but they won't do it because, you know, they use historical accuracy when it suits them, and they ignore it when it doesn't. So it's nice to see them as premiums. Are they quite expensive? Yes. If I'm comparing both of them to tell you which one to get, I would get the T-34 personally. It's going to be much more useful than the KV-2, but once again, we're getting into territory that we have in planes, where when I'm on a Russian team, nobody's in Russian planes, we're all in Americans. When I'm on a German team, everyone's in P-47s. Because wonderful captured aircraft. Like, I mean, I will never forget that video I did where the P-39-0 was basically you could unlock it doing special events, and I did, and I still really enjoy flying it. And then I did a video basically talking about how I had a replay where everyone on my team was in American aircraft, whether it be the P-39-0, whether it be the P-63 or the P-47. And it was just remarkable that the fact that each nation, when I started this game, it didn't have all of these premiums from other nations, and it meant that you actually had to work. Every nation had its different ways of flying aircraft, but now it seems because of the premiums put in, I've talked about this at length before, the issues with premiums. The fact is, I could fly every nation now. Let's just see if I'm correct. I might be wrong here. I might be slightly. Let's see. I can fly 3 nations and just fly the P-47 for each nation. Like, I mean, that would be an apt description. I was going to use the Russian example, but I can't find any Russian planes for the British or the Americans. But basically, yeah. If, let's say I want to play US, alright, I fly the P-47. Oh, I want to play Germany today. Oh, okay, I'll fly the P-47. I'll play Russia today. Oh, I'll fly the P-47. Like, it's not great. It's really destroying the fact that each faction used to have a dedicated way of playing, or maybe not a dedicated way, but you actually had to learn different aircraft and how they worked. There's a massive difference between how you fly a Bf-109 and how you fly a Spitfire. But the issue is if you give both nations the the opposite one, then what you're basically doing is you're screwing with the whole system. The same reason where if I play against a Russian team, I used to expect Russian aircrafts. This is how my brain would work. So I'll go, right, I'm at 4-0, so I'm looking for Yak-3Ps, I'm looking for Yak-3s, I'm looking for LA-5FNs, I'm looking for Yak-9Ks, Yak-9Ts, stuff like that, and they all are really good around this mid-altitude, right? And mid to low altitude. They fight you at mid-altitude, they bring you down, and they beat you with their superior turn-in, with the fact that their guns, if they get a few shots and hit you, you're going to die. So what you've got to do is you've got to get up to that high altitude, even if you're not as good at that high altitude, because you will still outperform them, and therefore you fight like that. What is now happening is if, let's say, as I said, I'm using a Spitfire, at 4-0, instead of what is happening, what you have is half a team of Yak-3s and Yak-3Ps and Yak-9Ks, so those mid-altitude to low-altitude fighters, and then the rest of the team are in P-47s and P-60s. P-63s, sorry. So they are advantageous at high altitude, medium altitude, and low altitude. So there is no running away. And also because you have this preconception in your head that you're fighting Russian teams, that means that you try and fly a supposed way, try and get that high altitude. You're just going to get mowed down by these American premiums that are in the air. There's nothing you can do about it. Absolutely nothing you can do about it. If I enter a match, and then when people start popping up and I see a bunch of American premium aircraft, I know my team is screwed because they're set up to face Russian aircraft. And then a bunch of American aircraft come in and they just die because the American aircraft outclimb them if they're played correctly. They perform better at high altitude, and while you are trying to sort out, diving down on these Russian aircraft, what is happening is you're having to fight these P-47s and P-63s while the Russian aircraft get to the position where they are better than you. It's mind-boggling. It really is. But anyway, so yeah, instead of solving the problem, just spread it out a bit. I won't be surprised if next patch we have Lend-Lease British and US T-34s, and I won't be surprised when the Japanese come out that we will have some kind of captured T-34. I think that would make complete sense, because it's much better to do that than actually look at the problem. Let's talk about USA, the last and final one. So USA, they have the T-29 heavy tank. When I faced it, because obviously I'm not going to buy it, it's way too expensive for the common person, especially with the bundle, it's definitely not worth the money. The T-29 is at 6.7, okay? So that puts it on par with the Super Pershing. It puts it on par with the M26E1 and the M46 Tiger. I've talked about in the past that the fact that the M26 was at the same BR as the M46 and the M26E1 was ridiculous, because it was not at the same caliber as the M46 and the M26. The M26E1 I'm talking about. The M26E1 was inherently better than the M26. It's the same vehicle with the same performance, but it had a better gun. Like, you cannot justify it being at the same BR. So what they did is they moved the M26 down. They moved it to 6.3, which, it makes sense. Now we have the same issue, once again, but with the Super Pershing. And I don't know what it is with Pershings. I'm sure if I did look at other things, but it was most prevalent with the M26. But now we have the T26E1-1, the Super Pershing, which is on par with the T29, right? The T29 is inherently better than the T26. It has better armor, it has a better gun, right? It has the same reload at stock, which is actually quite nice, and it has a better vertical guidance, it has slightly worse horizontal speed, I suppose, rotation speed, if you want to talk about it like that, and it has a slightly worse engine. Now, we have a game in War Thunder which the maps are not large enough. Not even with the new maps. They are not large enough for engine power to play a massive role, especially when we're talking about 4 or 5 kilometers. So the Super Pershing, even though it is slightly faster, even though it has a worse engine, but it is slightly faster, just because of the weight of the damn T-29, it's nearly 20 tons heavier. I mean, you're looking at more 15 tons heavier, but it's ridiculous. But anyway, when we're comparing them, 5 kilometers an hour is not going to make or break a tank. When we're comparing, as I said, when we're comparing them. What is going to make a massive difference is the fact that the spaced armor on the Super Pershing has never worked since day one. And it will never work, because if it does work, then unfortunately it becomes a terror to a lot of tanks that it has to face. Now, the T-29, it has this amazing gun on it, a 105 T5E2. If we look at the ammo that it has, the T13 ammo, 219 pen, 315 with APCR if you need it. It has the terrible APBC, which unfortunately the normal Pershing struggles with. But once you have that T13 ammo, you're going to just chew through people. The Super Pershing gets a terrible stock round, and then it gets a worse APC-BC round than the T-29. When you're adding HE filler, it seems, for American tanks, you decrease pen, right? That's why when you look at the stock shells, which are generally just big balls of metal and mass, basically, they bore into a tank and they don't do any damage, you have more pen on them. They, I'm guessing, have better penetration because there's no filler of high explosive. But when you take that into account, the T-29 still has more pen. It still has more than 10 millimeters of pen. Now, that may not seem a lot, but at 6.7, when you're fighting Tiger 2s, 10 millimeters of pen can be make or break. And that's not even looking at the armor. The armor on the T-29 is massively better than the Super Pershing. All you have to do is go and look yourself. It has a lot of so-called spaced armor, which kind of works. It sometimes soaks up shots. It doesn't have as many weak spots as the Super Pershing, which are glaring. The only real weak spot that we're looking at on the T-29 is basically if you can hit the upper glacis without hitting any of the weird parts of it, including the machine gun ports or the tracks, and the little dome on top of the gun manlet, which is very, very hard to hit. It's the same issue that I have with the IS-3 when people say, oh, the IS-3 is easy to kill because you got that little triangle you can shoot. It's very hard to hit that triangle, especially from range. But the fact is, the T-29 has superior armor to the Super Pershing, because the Super Pershing's armor is inherently broken and has been since day one. It has a superior gun. It has a slightly lower speed. It has a better engine. It is heavier. It has a better gun depression. It has the same reload rate. The T-29 is nearly in every way better than the T-26, but they sit at the same BR. We already had this issue with the M26 and the M2061. I don't want to have more issues like this. And there's no reason why the T-29 can't be in the tree. You drop the T-26 to 6.3. And then the T-26 is on par with the M26. And what you say is they're very, very similar, which they very, very are. The only real difference is the gun. And then, if you have issues with that, you drop the M26 down. Because the Jumbo is at 6.0. So you drop the M26 to 6.0. You can drop the Jumbo to 5.7, and you can drop the T-25 to 5.7. Or you can keep them at 6.3. Because having... the issue that I have is when a premium is inherently better than a tank which is in the tree, which is very similar to it. Because then that is, in effect, pay to win. And we are slightly starting to see that stuff. There are examples of this, and so far, the ones that I brought up have actually been addressed, which is kind of nice, and we have seen BR changes and everything like that, but the T29 being put in shows that they have not learnt their lesson. The next tank is the M551 Sheridan. It's probably is... no, the STRV... no, the STRV is actually pretty good. As I said, the fact that it has a gun is nice. It's just the fact that Britain doesn't have an ATO ATGM really makes me sad. But the Sheridan had issues at launch. It seemed to be bugged, but it seems to be better now. So, yeah, hopefully it's good. I mean, as I said, if you want to know about ATGMs, go look at part 1. I talked about it in length. The M48A1, a tank which didn't really need to be here, but it is here now. Very pretty tank. You know what? It doesn't matter. This may sound very weird to some people, but as I've said many times, at tier 5, because you have these tanks at 7.7, when you have the Mouse, when you have the Jagdpanzer 4.5, 4 Russians, when you have the T-54s, when you have the IS-4M, mainly the T-54s though, when they have this heat round, this magical, wonderful heat round, or even the Sabo rounds, I suppose, if we're looking at it, but mainly the heat round. Let's see if it's present on this T-34. Ah, what a surprise. It is, the 1951 T-34. It has 380mm of heat FS penetration. Nearly every top tier tank, for some reason, has this damn heat, has this shell, and it's no different from the M48A1. But it means that the gameplay is incredibly bland. And the difference is the M48A1 gets a weaker version of the heat FS shell. It gets a 320mm penetrating thing instead of a 380 of the T-54 1951. But if you keep giving this shell to every top tier tank, it makes the gameplay incredibly boring, because it means everyone can pen everyone from any angle shooting at any part of their tank. So all it really depends on is where your crew are in that tank and if the heat's going to hit them. The Pattern 3, as I've called it, or the M48A1, does not solve the issue that we had. It fills a gap, which I suppose is quite nice. It puts a gap between the M47 and the M60, giving you a 7.7 tank. But the Americans already had a 7.7 tank, the M103, and that has its issues as well. Its stock round does literally nothing, and once again, it has that heat FS at 380mm, the only round which does anything in that tank, which everyone else at higher tiers is using. And it is an issue which I will bang on about till the end of time until it is fixed, so you can actually get some variation in top tier battles. If it doesn't get fixed and everybody still keeps getting this round, or a variant of this round, meaning that everyone can pen anyone, it is incredibly boring at high tiers in tanks. You've added 80 gems to try and address the problem, but it's unfortunately just made the problem worse. So we have the last tank, which is the LVT A1. Now, the fact that they've actually named it like this actually makes me kind of happy, because it may mean that more LVTs come in. Like, I think, in a way, this reserve tank that they put in was a proof of concept, because there are some amazing LVT tanks out there. One of them has a 75mm howitzer on it. I'm just having a look now as we speak. There we go. Let's have a look. So we have the LVT A-1, which had the 37mm on, which is basically the one we have in game. You have the A-2, which also had the same thing. It was basically a slightly different. You had the LVT-4, which had which had a 20mm on it. That would have been interesting. And then you have the A-3, which was an armoured version of the LVT-4. And then you have the LVT A-4, which had the 37mm on it. And it also could get a 75 millimeter on it, which is basically the same gun as the 75mm gun motor carriage. So basically, you have the LV2 in game. You have the gun, which made the LVT A-4 really good, the 75mm. All you have to do is make them kiss and put it on top of it. Make it the turret we see in Men of War. Make it that open-topped LVT with the short-barreled 75 howitzer on it, and it will be incredibly fun. It will be the glass cannon that we always talk about. The LVT A1 at reserve level is, it's just a boat, really. It's quite fun to go along a river in it, but it's not really going to pack that much of a punch. It's nice that it's at 1.0. It's the same as all the other reserves. I would take the other reserves over this. The main reason for that is at reserve, as I said about the German tank, armor doesn't really mean a lot, because basically everything can pen everything else. It's very hard to bounce off a reserve tank unless you're not aiming properly. So the fact that it has no armor doesn't really matter. The fact that it has the same gun as something like an M2A4 means, why don't I just take the M2A4? It is the same gun, apart from it has a bit more pen, it seems, on the LV2. But I don't need that pen, because I'm not facing stuff at 3.0. I don't need 89mm of pen. The M2A4 is 76mm of pen. And the M2A4 is faster, it has better turret rotation, you don't have people hanging about the side. I mean, it's nice to have machine gunners, but what use are they in this game right now? They're not. And so, when we're comparing them like for like, just as I did with the Panzer II and the Panzer III, if you're looking for a better tank, you take the M2A4 every time. Is it nice that it goes in the river? Yeah, it's great. I still don't see the point in that mechanic. It doesn't seem to be useful on anything. I thought it would be useful on the Tunisian map, but it ain't, because you can't go into the sea and you can't go around the little town that they've made, which is really, really sad. I thought you would be able to do that, but you can't, because as you try and go around, you hit a screen which says turn back to the edge of the map. So even that is useless. There is very few maps that it's useless on. It is not very useful, it is kind of useful on Eastern Europe, but that's it. And even saying it's kind of useful is that's very much upplaying it, because the fact is, once you're in the river, it's kind of hard to get out if you're trying to go along it. Maybe you get a surprise attack on one tank, but that's really about it. The fact that it's so big, it's very easy to shoot, it's very easy to knock out crew. I've heard a lot of people say, the fact it's got a lot of crew is really great, because even if you get shot, you've got a lot of people to replace the crew that just got knocked down. If you have got shot and your gunner's out, you're dead, because they'll just keep shooting you in the turret. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how much crew you have, because they will just keep doing it. They will just keep shooting you in the gunner spot, so and one man is just going to keep dying over and over and over again in the same spot. So yeah, it's nice to see another boat tank. I would like to see a map where boat tanks are useful. So far we haven't had one. The M2A4 is better. So, how about the ground vehicles overall in this update? I think, they've obviously focused largely on higher tier stuff. The ATGM thing was a really big pushing point for them, and in my personal opinion, I don't like it. It takes away a lot of the skill of the game, and it means that the people who were dominating at high tiers are still dominating, which is a real issue when you're looking for balance in a game. As I've said many times, you can either go for historical accuracy, or you can go for balance. You can't do this weird mesh of trying to do both of them. And right now, it seems like they are trying to do balance by doing ludicrous things. By throwing in ATGMs to basically see how they work. Basically trying to do something really cool that will attract new people. But at the same time, you're just breaking the game. And that's not great. It would be nice for the British to get a top tier ATGM, I think they need it. I don't class the STRV 81 medium as a top tier ATGM, because it isn't in those 7.7 or 8.0 battles, and Britain is the nation which needs help at late tier 5. The chieftain has been bastardized in this game so much, and it is sad to me. It is really, really sad. Because I thought it would dominate. I really did. And then they took away its power. Because of that Heat FS shell. The shell that everyone gets, apart from the chieftain. So yeah, it's very sad. But overall, there's not many tanks which are very useful here. The T-29 is a nice tank. I wish it wasn't premium. You're probably going to see a lot of them about. Watch out for flying guided rockets. It's always hard to deal with. And yeah, if you're going to keep doing this thing where you just give every nation the powerful tanks from every other nation, go for it. But you will lose the team play. You will lose everything, as you have in planes at certain tiers and BRs. It doesn't become fun anymore. It isn't fun. Because you're just facing, as I said, you're facing Russian teams which are made up of American aircraft, and you cannot set up to fight them. And it's the same thing in tanks. If I'm in a British tank, and I'm looking at Germany, I'm in a Cromwell, and I'm looking at Germany, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll face some of the early Panzer IVs, like the F2s and the Fs. Maybe I'll face some of the Panzer IIIs, the Js, and, it'll be a good battle. And then I come around a corner, I'm having a look around it, there's 3 T-34s there. I didn't set up to face 3 T-34s. They're gonna blast my arse out. It's gonna keep happening. And it's kind of sad, but it is their game, not mine. Simple as that. So I think I'm more happy with the aircraft than the ground vehicles, just because, as I said, I don't like the ATGMs, and this focus on giving everyone the better tanks from each nation. So, have a nice day, and next time we'll have a look at the more general changes in the game.